All righty, let's go ahead and get started. Well, I'm Rene, owner and operator of Guaranteed Pest Solutions. I'm glad that we've had a couple hours to let the food digest because we're gonna get buggy here, guys. We're gonna get a little slithery, a little furry, and all that good stuff. Uh, I'm sure you guys are all men minus the one lady in the room. You guys will be all right. All right. When I was asked to do this, I said, okay, home inspectors are, I've seen your reports before. They're definitely going to be guys that are going to run into pests inside the home. So what's the value, or I guess what's the importance of pest awareness for the home inspector? Well, first and foremost, as you guys probably already know, added value to your clients. You guys, we all hear the term jack of all trades. I like to just say that's another term for a home inspector, pretty much. So they pretty much can inform their clients on a multitude of things, including pests. Liability reduction, that's going to be, a big one there. Unfortunately, whenever we're dealing with problems inside of a home, uh, if something goes missed, a lot of the times pest control companies get sued. A lot of times home inspectors get sued. Actually, recently, just about a year ago now, where a house that was just recently sold had split in Alexandria, and the purchasers were coming after both the pest control company and the home inspector because of this split. There was termites involved, and a bunch of other things that caused the house to split. But yeah, just having some liability reductions, and then collaboration with pest control professionals. Um, as Sonny was just talking about, people call him, Mike calls him and says, hey, what's going on with this unit? You guys should all have a pest control professional on your Rolodex. When you guys run into something you're not sure of, it looks a little funky, looking a little buggy, you should be able to contact somebody and say, hey, what do you think about this? Pests and topics that we're going to cover here today. We got termites, powder post beetles, rodents, which are, both mice and rats. We're going to do cockroaches, and then we're going to kind of do a quick thing of snakes and bats. We're going to we're going to talk about signs to look for during your inspections, the hazards that these critters, pests like to bring along with you, and then what I would say a recommended treatment for such would be. And then we're going to briefly cover the WDI inspections and the NPMA 33 form. Just a quick question. Do any of y'all in the room offer a WDI inspection currently? Okay, cool. A couple. Perfect. So we'll go briefly over that. All right, first and foremost, we got the eastern subterranean termite. Right? This guy is a wood-destroying insect. These guys are known as pretty much the heaviest wood-destroying insect that we can run into in our area. They are fast-acting, tearing up homes. Now, inside of a colony, we have three castes, pretty much. The workers, which is going to make up about over 90% of that population. We have soldiers down here in the bottom. Those guys are there to protect the workers doing their things. And then we got the sex reproductives, the future kings and queens of a colony, inside each termite colony. These guys are known as subterranean termites. Why? Because they live outside, live outdoors. Sometimes you might hear that, oh, termites are living inside my home. No, that's not here. That's Florida. We don't have drywood termites here. Our subterranean termites do not live inside of homes. They work 24/7, 365 a year in Northern Virginia. It doesn't matter if it's, middle of winter. Yeah, they get a little bit more docile in the winter, but they're still working. They just dig a little bit further deeper, making it a little bit harder for us to find and see them. But they are still working and moving their way into that home. There can be upwards of about 1 million termites per each subterranean colony. I like to say that termites are just as prevalent as ants, your odorous house ants and stuff. But the reason why we're not seeing them in our areas is because they live underground. And then they travel into homes through protective mud tunnels. Here's a good image of what you'd typically find, a mud tunnel, you don't always get lucky and find them just going up some block, some foundation like that. But every so often you can find that tunnel sometimes in garages and stuff. What kind of signs are we going to be looking at for an infestation? Well, first and foremost, it's either the insect or the insect wings themselves. These would be mostly associated with those sex reproductives I was talking about. People call them swarmers, right? Termite swarmers. Sorry about the picture; it's not the most clear, but you can see some swarmer termites in this pile. But then when you see all these little wings, that's a lot of times the indication that there's an infestation. If you find this during a home inspection, wings or the swarmer termites, usually it's going to be around the springtime. That's when we call swarm season, right? If you find that, the only time a termite colony will produce these guys is when they're fully mature. So anywhere from 3 to 5 years of age, and that's when that termite colony will start producing these termites. When we're talking about upwards of 1 million termites in a population, that's a pretty good indication that you got a bad infestation going. And it's also the number one thing that triggers a call to pest control companies. Guys, a client calls and says, "Hey, I got all these bugs flying around. I think they're ants. Come help me." And we get out there, and sure enough, they're termites. There's specific ways to tell the difference between an ant swarm and a termite swarmer too. I didn't put that in the slides, but if you want to know, I'll be happy to talk to you guys about that. Mud tunnels and frass. Yeah, talk about we don't like Sunny said, we don't say anything close to like the mold word in my industry. We use things like growth and like bacterial growth, like he was talking about. But you can definitely see there's something going on back there, some kind of organic growth that's causing this crawl space to be just a huge conducive condition for termites to come. And these termites are happily coming in there so much that you start seeing these big tunnels just making their way down. Termites are blind. They can't see where they're going, the subterranean termite and stuff. So if they run out of wood, they don't know that they're running out of wood. They just keep building their tunnel down. So, if you ever run into a crawl space and you got big mud tunnels hanging off, there you got a big problem there. You wanna definitely notate that one. Damage. This is probably going to be the most significant thing that people start seeing inside of homes. Yeah. I put this picture up here because this is probably the easiest or the greatest picture I had to show that, hey, this is 100% termite damage. The few things that we are seeing here, we have mud packed inside the galleries that are chewed out. That's a clear indication that this was caused by termites, not something like water or carpenter ants or anything like that. These are subterranean termites. Also, since we have those galleries kind of going in this vertical pattern, sorry, not vertical, horizontal pattern. That's the termites going after the cellulose-rich spring wood of a piece of wood, rather than going for the summer wood. It doesn't always happen that they only eat or chew through the spring wood, but a lot of the times this is what you'll see is these gallery shaped chew outs. And then, man, these guys can do some crazy damage. I added this picture in here. This was a house I looked at last year. It was built in 2022, this home. So people ask, do termites work fast? Oh yeah, they do. So this, what triggered this call was this homeowner was having issues opening and shutting that door. And then when we went out there, we found just this little piece in the drywall that was showing some mud signs coming, like a mud tunnel coming its way through that drywall. And I was like, well, there's a termite tunnel. If you're having issues with that door, there's probably some damage back here. They had there's a few things going on. They had a stucco exterior, so moisture and stuff was wicking back behind there, which was causing very conducive conditions for these termites to really become active and stuff. And then finally, they started having contractors rip apart, and this is pretty much what they found. Another thing I want to point out is this home was treated for termites too, both in the pre-treatment when they did their build and then a post-treatment from a pest control company. It is super important that you, and it's something I'm going to cover more further that we get in this thing is you know, pest control companies mess this thing up, you know, so many times. It's the number one reason why pest control companies get sued. Uh, I can't stress enough that you need a professional to do this kind of work, because even they mess up homeowners doing their own remedy or whatever it may be can really lead to a lot of disaster. Here's another picture of a home. This home was and their damage. This home was just when we took this picture, this home was just recently purchased. It had drywall all up inside of their garage. They didn't know that I was there, and then they wanted to change some things up, so they had it gutted. And sure enough, you can see the termites kind of working their way through that, you know, header beam there, and then up inside the insulate. You know, we get asked sometimes, do they eat things other than wood? Well, yeah, actually they will. They'll start chewing in through the paper and the cellulose that insulation is holding on. But then also we've seen them basically thin out drywall down to nothing, where you can poke your finger and sure enough, it goes right through. So that's some things to just be aware of when you're looking for termites inside of a home. Hazards. I mean, we saw it all in the last few slides, but you know, United States, there's about $5 billion worth of damage each year caused by termites and what they did. I mean, clearly and obviously what we saw in those slides and pictures earlier, there's a reason why. That stuff's not cheap for certain, having those builders rip that stuff out and redo it. Not covered by most home insurances. This is a big one, you know. Since they're doing this much damage, I mean, I still haven't seen a home insurance that will say that they cover termites. Even in some cases where like you see moisture involved and maybe they want to cover the moisture side, they won't cover anything for the termites when they see that termites start working their way through that. And then obviously structural damages. Yeah, that support beam's not looking very supporting anymore. I'll tell a quick nightmare story about subterranean termites. Probably the worst one that I had. There was a gentleman's grandmother living in Percival, and she had some old farm, and luckily he was there visiting her. She was elderly and disabled. Luckily he was there visiting her, and he put his foot directly through the floor. She had hardwood floors, just walking around. He had a dirt-filled basement there. Very similar to the picture with all the termite tunnels hanging down. The termites just ravaged her subfloor and into her hardwood floors, and pretty much her son just put his foot through the floor. Luckily, it was him. You know, he was a young dude, and he was able to kind of help himself out. If it was the elderly lady, it could have been a lot worse. So yeah, structural damage is definitely a hazard when it comes to these guys. Now we're going to talk about treatments. There's two basic types of treatments that are recommended in subterranean termites in our area. First and foremost, this is getting more and more popular. A lot more people are relying on these things is bait stations. There's another two types of bait stations that are very popular in our area. These are Centricon bait stations, and then you got your advanced bait stations, or Traylona, right? So both, they're honestly the same thing. Like, they both act on novafluron, just a little bit different design. If you go on Corteva's website, who makes Centricon, you'll find a video that says termites prefer Centricon over top of Traylona, and vice versa. You go on BASF's website, they say. But as stated earlier, they're blind. They actually don't have a sense of smell at all. You know, if some people try to say like, oh, these termite stations, they smell. No, they can't. They have no idea. They have to be placed a certain way so that termites find them correctly. But I've seen them work just fine in both stations. I've used them both, and they're very good. The Nova Fluron that is basically designed for the termites to pick it up and bring back into their colony. It's the both companies say the same thing. It's the one thing in pest control that's guaranteed to wipe out an entire termite colony. So that's a great option to have. The other option is liquid and foam treatments. This is, I love doing liquid treatments. I think they're tried and true. This is when you see a guy coming around digging a 6x6 trench around the exterior of a building. Usually in post-construction, this is when you'll see this this treatment happening. And they take essentially a ground rod and they inject a termiticide every foot inside that trench down to, it's down to 4 feet or to the foot or whatever, whichever they hit first. And that just coats that whole, foundation wall and makes it so that when termites are moving through that, it latches to them and it'll start killing off the problem. Usually takes about 90 days is what the label recommended and what we've seen in the past if termites are attacking inside of a home to wipe out that termite colony. Termidor foam is, or termiticide foam is also another great treatment thing, especially when they've made it so far inside the home. There's not too much things that we can do in like normal living spaces and stuff, but this gives us a great option to get treatments directly into those tunnels.
They're more repellent rather than bait. They're gonna take stuff back to the colony. It's gonna affect the colony. It's just keep them away from the house.
Well, that's a great question. So certain liquids are repellent liquids. A lot more people in the industry are getting away from that. Now, it is cheap. It is easy to use. When you talk about like pre-treatments and stuff, a lot of companies will use something like a repellency, but the repellency product usually only lasts for a few years inside the ground, like one to 3 years. Whereas some of the better stuff like Termidor, what you're seeing down here, that's a non-repellent termiticide, which basically they move through it blindly. They have no idea that it's going. It's actually developed to break down their exoskeleton and actually kill off the termite.
Microphone.
My point was, other than the bait traps, they don't take anything back that kills the colony.
Oh, well, so actually in the non-repellent situation, they actually do. Since they move through it undetectingly, termites are very social creatures. So most insects that go through a liquid barrier for insecticides, what it's meant to do is when it latches onto that insect, they're moving through, they go through a process called self-grooming, and they kind of clean each other like monkeys, like kind of, eating off of one another and like cleaning themselves. And then that's when they ingest the product and it kills them from the source. Now, the reason why I say that termite or the bait stations are more like that's the one that's guaranteed to wipe it out, since those workers are going back to feed that queen if the queen is destroyed, then the colony is destroyed. The queen doesn't always self-groom with these other insects. So sometimes the liquid treatment doesn't actually do the trick of, killing off the whole queen. But I mean, I've seen it successful in both statuses. The best termite treatment is if you pair them up, you do both liquid and bait stations, which sometimes is the case. Like I said, I can't stress enough that these, both should be done by a professional. You can go on Amazon, you can find pretty much any insecticide, you can find bait stations and stuff. I could tell you, I see enough professionals mess this up with bait stations. I've been to houses where people say, "Oh, I got bait stations off of Facebook yard sale page," and I put them in. They put them on the corners of their house. One guy, they had gotten Centricon bait stations, and I went back to their house, and instead of having them installed inside the ground like the Centricon station was, they had them all laying around their house like this. Termites never see that. So yeah, I mean, I can't stress it enough that it should be a professional installing these things. this is actually something that's been brought up a lot to me. The home team TAC systems. I'm sure some of you guys have seen these in your home inspections. This is an insecticidal port that they put a system inside the walls that starts shooting out insecticide, right? Inside those walls. Well, this is not a termite treatment. Actually, they don't claim it to be. This is straight from their website. Ants, cockroaches, spiders, scorpions, wasps, earwigs, no termites. Even if the insecticide that they're using is labeled for termites, this system can't penetrate those mud tunnels and stuff to actually reach to those termites. So this is definitely not a recommended termite treatment. My wife just last week was talking to a lady at a park, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I need a termite treatment. I haven't had one done in a long time." And so she's like, "All right." She's like, "I'll send you what I have when I get home." Or like the lady was like, "I'll send you what I have," and she sent her a picture of the home team thing. It's like, well, no, you haven't had a termite treatment in a long time because that's not a termite treatment. Next, any questions about subterranean termites? Yes, sir. So the TAC system, pretty much it's used as a insecticide treatment to take care of bugs inside of wall voids. Now, there's some, I think this is probably a good representation of what insects you may find inside wall voids. I personally don't would say I wouldn't recommend this treatment unless it's paired up with like a structural pest control treatment. Just because most of the time insects aren't even crossing through the wall void, the inner sides of the drywall and stuff. They're moving through thresholds and stuff, so window seals and door frames and plumbing voids and different things like that. So having a barrier, a non-repellent barrier inside those areas is what I usually recommend. But if you're describing it to a client, the only people that offer it is the home team people or home team office too. This is a big Rollins owned company inside the area. But yeah, me personally, I don't recommend it. Now a bunch of people, home team sold it to a bunch of builders, and so you see them install it in a lot of homes and stuff like that. I haven't personally used it either. I've never worked at home team or anything like that. Any other questions? Subterranean termites? Was this a repellent versus bait? If you saw the TAC system, what would you recommend? Say
No, that
Oh.
was. Alan, go ahead with your question.
Oh,
You're muted, Alan. We can't hear you.
Okay. How would you handle a tube that's been scraped off by someone? Would you recommend treatment or what? We run into this quite frequently.
yeah, absolutely. So I would definitely recommend that treatment be done if you find any evidence, whether it's a damaged insect or a tube, even if it's been scraped off, because who knows if it has ever been treated. And the best recommendation would be, even if that tube is no longer active, we don't always get lucky to find tubes. So it's always recommended that if you find any evidence, the recommendation is to get a treatment done. If they had, usually if, in a seller buyer situation, like in a WDI inspection or something, the seller would be able to produce paperwork that says, hey, this structure was treated at, last spring or whatever, and I have warranty with them. It triggers that for that person to bring that up. But yeah, there's two types of houses out there. There's ones with termites and ones that are going to get termites. Subterranean termites are just very, very common. Like I said earlier, they're just as prevalent as your typical odorous house ant that you see marching around buildings and around your homes. The only reason why we don't see them every day is because they live underground. They like to get into the hard to find, hard to reach places, but they certainly do happen. Every house pretty much gets them. So treatment's always recommended. Any more questions?
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, next wood destroying insect that we're going to talk about is powder post beetles. This guy, although they're a wood destroying insect, they're not as damaging as the subterranean termite would be. These guys, I would, they're still wood destroying, but I would consider them a lot less. Most of the time, most of Northern Virginia doesn't really even get them. You'll see them out in like Western Loudoun. You'll see them out around Alexandria, Arlington near the river and stuff. I'm not saying that you can't see them in the other areas in Northern Virginia, but typically what I've seen them, it's all in those areas. Yeah, inside the valley, Shenandoah Valley and stuff. There's two types of powder post beetles inside of our area. We have the true powder post beetle, known as the licted powder post beetle. That's this guy right here. Notice that his body is a lot more elongated. His antennae is a lot more visible than his counterpart, which would be the anabid powder post beetle. Oh, did I do that? Oops. Okay. The anabid powder post beetle. So the true powder post beetle only attacks the licted only attacks hardwoods. He does not go after softwoods, and he only typically will go after hardwoods that are fairly new. So from the time that they come from the manufacturing plant to about 10 years. So you'll find these guys in some new construction situations. Very slow acting. They typically don't do much damage. You'll find their little holes and stuff, but since most of the time conditions aren't very solid for them, they're just really slow acting. A lot of the times when I run into these guys, I'm like, we can definitely do a borate treatment, but in all honesty, you'll probably outlive any kind of like bad situation that will come from the licted powder post beetles. The anabid powder post beetle is known to attack. You got a question?
Yeah, so internally to the hardwood, what does it look like?
It looks like pretty much that I'm gonna get to it. I have pictures to show when it gets bad and stuff, and when wood's been cut open. But yeah, I'll get to that here in a second. The anabid powder post beetle, this guy is a little bit more active. He's a little bit more damaging. He will attack both hardwoods and softwoods. So pine, spruce, all that stuff is definitely something that the anabid guy would go after. He is he's also known to be in the older homes. So in Western Loudoun, we got a bunch of 1700, 1800 homes. We'll find a bunch of the anabid powder post beetle damage. And in my experience, this has been the more damaging powder post beetle inside the area. We don't get it too often, but it does happen. They live in wood beams or wood objects such as furniture and frames. Sometimes it's not even that they're attacking your home. This is something that came from when whatever this object was manufactured. They bring these back and they just live inside of that lamp. They live inside that picture frame. They live inside that piece of furniture. And of course, whenever that happens, it's always somebody has some kind of emotional attachment to that, so they can't just chuck it in the fireplace and call it done. They need something crazy going on with it. And kind of what I stated earlier, in favorable conditions, their life cycle, so from egg to pupate, larva to adult, could take 3 years to complete. In unfavorable conditions, which is most of the time the case, can take 5 years to complete. Why is that important for you guys to know? Well, because the only stage that really does the damage is the larva state. That's the one that is actually drilling the holes and actually consuming the wood. Let's see. Signs of infestation, exit holes. This is what you guys are gonna see most of the time. You can see, little nice pinholes. Sometimes, older pest control guys in my industry will tell you like, oh, you could tell from the hole size. Well, whenever I've seen them, I've seen so many different hole sizes. I don't I don't know if that's quite true, that you can tell them from the size of their hole, but you'll find these, looks like somebody just took an ice pick and started stabbing the beam. Sometimes you get those holes, but then you also find fine dust. I mean, if you see this on an inspection, you know that that's an active population, and they're moving pretty good. That probably means that there's very favorable conditions in this case that you'll start finding this frass coming out, leaking out of the holes, but then also piled up underneath. You can also know that this, I mean, besides looking at the holes and stuff, you can also know that this is a powder post beetle frass because it's clean. Other frasses that you find, carpenter ants, termites, those kind of things, they're filled with, I mean, mud or droppings. For carpenter ants, you'll find insect body parts because they're kind of barbaric, and they, when they're marching around creating their galleries, they kind of take a bite out of one another and spit it out if they start going a little bit too slow in the line. So for the powder post beetles, you'll find very clean and fine powder for their frass. And then, I put damage and heavy conditions. You don't see this very frequently, but to your question that you're saying earlier, when you have a bad powder post beetle problem, I've seen it actually. I wish I could have found the picture, but I've seen it where like the beam was so structurally damaged from these powder post beetles that you could poke it and it was crumbling away. So this is the best picture I could find to kind of illustrate what it looks like on the inside of that. I mean, that board's been pretty hollowed out. That probably took 100 years for those powder post beetles to do. They're not like the termites. Termites can eat a 8-foot 2x4 in 1 year, completely decimate the 8-foot 2x4 normal population of termites. Whereas powder post beetles, it's going to take them some time to really do some damage in unfavorable conditions. Should probably note that. Hazards to watch for, just cosmetic damages is usually what triggers our call. Somebody has, or a call to a pest control person, somebody has a lamp or a picture frame, and they say, hey, these holes are popping up. That's usually what would trigger us coming out there. Like I say, of course, it's my great aunt that passed away or whatever gave me this thing, and there's too much sentimental value with that, and there's no getting rid of it. So something needs to be done. And then structural damage and heavy. There's another good picture of what they can do structurally. That beam doesn't look too sportive. Whenever I run into these situations too, just so everybody in this room knows, we always recommend, I might say, ooh, that doesn't look good. I'll be like, you should probably have a structural engineer look at anything. Don't take my word for saying if something's structurally sound or not. But, when we find damage, especially that's looking not too good, I'll say, hey, you should talk to a structural engineer about those. Treatment recommendations. This is a very common treatment recommendation for powder post beetles is borates. It will not eliminate that full population. If there's powder post beetles, it's not going to knock out them completely. But if there's ever like, hey, we're noticing this fine powder, it'll at least slow them down enough that the homeowner's a lot more comfortable having that powder post beetles inside their home than going the next route, which would be fumigation, tent in a home. This is the true way to make sure that the penetration will kill off the entire population. Very, very rare that we ever see this happen, just because, like I said, they're not so fast acting. It's not like the termite where like they got to worry about falling through their floor necessarily. But in some cases, you might see a house tent pop up for powder post beetles, but usually it's that sentimental value object that I was talking about earlier, that they get an object fumigation. So there's a couple companies in the area that will bring a trailer and they'll pump gas into that trailer with the object inside of it to actually kill off the powder post beetle, which is a very costly thing, even if it's just a trailer. And then, you know, my favorite thing is just, hey, if there's no sentimental value there, get rid of it, you know, toss it in the fireplace and let it, you know, if it's an object, obviously just get rid of it and you don't have to worry about the problem anymore. Any questions about powder post beetles?
In the fumigation, are they still using methylene chloride?
There's a couple products that have come that's released now. I think there's 3 different ones. I myself have never done a fumigation. I'm not I'm not certified to do so. I'd love to get in touch with like guys like Dotson that actually will do those and just see the job getting done. So I don't have a ton of information on fumigations, but last I checked, there was about 3 new products out there that they use.
50 years ago, I worked for security storage downtown, and they had a big fumigation room in there for wood stuff that came in from overseas that had to go into that room.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
The
cool.
old 1840, 1850 building in Florida Avenue.
Okay, I wouldn't want to sit next to that building.
We would get serious warnings about that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been several lawsuits of people fuming like resorts and stuff and people getting sick and just nasty business. That is a very, very toxic treatment method. Any other questions? Cool. All right. Furry friends. I'm going to talk about mice and rats. Our common species in Northern Virginia. We got the house mouse and the field mouse. People ask me, Rene, how do you tell the difference between a house mouse and a field mouse? I said, well, is it in your house? No, that's a joke. In the upper left-hand corner, you have your typical house mouse. An easy way to identify him is you're going to see like the more grayish tint color to him. You're going to see these pointed eyes, smaller eyes, or sorry, pointed ears and smaller round eyes. Whereas the field mouse or the deer mouse, you're going to have more bigger rounded ears and then a much bigger eye. These guys are typically a lot larger too in size when you find them inside of a home. A lot of times when a client says, I had a rat run across my floor, that wasn't actually a rat. It's probably the field mouse that runs through. And then you have your Norway rat. There's another common rat inside the area to add into the size of roof rats. You know, I've only seen them in one small area inside of Arlington. They're very similar to the Norway rat. The only difference is that they prefer the higher reaches of places. Not saying you can't find a Norway rat in an attic, but the roof rat always prefers the attic over top of like a basement or a crawl space or anything like that. They breed frequently with short breeding cycles. This is both for the mice and rats. That, you know, they go at it with one another and they get tons of pups every year. So they invade like crazy inside of homes. Rats need water daily. This is a very important thing, whereas mice do not. So mice can get their moisture content from the food that they consume. Rats need it every single day. So if there's a rat infestation inside of a home, there's some way that it's either A, you have a water issue that's providing moisture for that rat, or they have a way back outside, which typically they have a way back outside. And then they're survivalists. They're inside of homes for both food and shelter. You know, we get harsh winters in this area, so when resources dry up and they're not easy to come by, the rodent wants to get inside, and that's why a lot of people say in the winter they see rodents inside their home. A lot of people think that they're getting cold. It's not about them necessarily getting cold. It's more about them surviving. They need something to eat, and when everything dries up outside, they come for our stuff. Signs of a rodent infestation, gonna be droppings. You know, you can see a good amount of those little. I like to say little black rice grains. Right, is how I would describe a mouse droppings. I would describe Rat droppings would be more like a Tic Tac size dropping. You could tell the difference between the two from their droppings. Good. Next, oh, no problem. Next, next sign of infestation that we typically find, and I see this in home inspector reports, are going to be your burrow tunnels. So you're inside, you know, these could be both indoors and outdoors, but typically inside of attics is probably the easiest way to find them. When you see that, like, you know, nice little hole there inside the insulation, you know that you got some rodents that are trying to find some nesting materials, and get up underneath that. Fiberglass installations, very, very typical to find these things. And when you have a mouse population, there has been a rumor that says cellulose insulation will not get rodent burrows. That's not true. They certainly can. Cellulose insulation can definitely have mice in it. They typically don't like it more, mainly because when they try to burrow into cellulose insulation, it starts collapsing on top of them, making it very uncomfortable for them. So they don't typically like to, but I have seen it where, you know, burrow tunnels are running through attics with cellulose insulation. Even the pest control insulation, which is cellulose mixed in with the borate, that no whether it's tap insulation or Supreme Plus insulation, none of them list mice or rats on their label. They do not treat them. If the pest control company did a good job, the pest control that installed the insulation did a good job of sealing up the attic, they'll definitely prevent them from getting in, but it's not something that keeps them away. But burrow tunnels are a very common thing to find. Rodent rubs. So mice and rats have oily furs that when they constantly move into an area, you'll start seeing a grayish tint kind of form. It's from their body basically scooting across that area and heavy enough. Oh, I got to start moving. All right, man. I could talk about bugs all day long, but burrow tunnels are another way. And then the final one would be gnaw marks. Rodents' teeth are like our fingernails; they never stop growing. So when they in order for them to file those teeth down, they have to constantly gnaw at something. I was talking with gentlemen earlier today about, you know, one of the biggest hazards for pest control technicians when we're doing inspections are inside of crawl spaces, because mice and rodents will chew up wires that can sit into water when we're crawling through, and then zap, there we go. So very, very cautious thing to look out for is any wires that have been chewed up, or, you know, it could be a piece of wood. A lot of times people will say, I'm hearing a bunch of this in my wall, or, you know, a bunch of scratching inside my wall, and that's what they're doing. They're gnawing at that drywall or whatever to shave down their teeth. Hazards: disease, contamination, and property damage. Everybody heard about the hantavirus? Yeah, every year Virginia gets at least one case where somebody's hospitalized due to the hantavirus, and that's simply they come into contact with rodent droppings in urine. You know, it's when it's moved a certain way, it can become friable. We breathe it in, it gets into our lungs, causes the upper respiratory system to have issues and stuff. So disease is a big hazard to worry about when you guys are crawling in crawl spaces or getting the attics because of these. I mean, you guys should always be protecting yourself with PPE, but make sure you guys are wearing, you know, a respirator and an N95 mask at the very least, and some gloves and eyewear and all that good stuff. Contamination, you know, they like our stuff, so you can find their issue, or you can find them, like their droppings or urine and our things. The nastiest time that I ever saw was when mice were getting into rice, and like the family seemed to not care, but they were making rice. I can't tell the difference between the white and the black rice. I guess, I don't know. Pretty good. And then properties. Yeah. Yeah, a little wild rice. Treatments involve exclusion. That's always our goal at Guaranteed Pest is we want to make sure that we seal up access from outside in. Once that's step number one. Step number two would be setting up traps, you know. Here's a good illustration of what some exclusion would look like. This was an electrical conduit that was going in, had a big old hole from when the contractor you know, made it chase through. We back it typically with, I like to back it with some kind of copper mesh or excluder, like some wire things. And then that gray silicone looking stuff that you're seeing over top of that, it's a very common one in my industry called rodent stop. Rodents don't like to eat on it because it tastes gruesome. And then the good old Victor snap tracks, you know, your grandpappy used it, we still use it, and they're great, they work, right? Now I say get a professional to do these things because there are certain ways that you want to make sure that these traps are set up to be successful. Rodents move a certain way pretty much throughout houses. Homeowners don't ever know this because when they see a mouse, they freak out, and that mouse freaks out and it darts across the floor. Well, typically a mouse doesn't just run in the middle of your floor. They're going to run along the walls and stuff. So placement of the traps is important. Rodenticides, these are getting less. I mean, every pest control company is still using these, but like myself, but they are getting more and more regulation against them. The EPA is starting a rodenticide act. We still don't know exactly when, but it's going to basically make all second generation anticoagulant rodenticides a restricted use pesticide, meaning only people that can use these things are people with a commercial certification. Not everybody in my industry has such a license to do, but rodenticides are definitely getting, you know, a little bit harder to work or use, but they work. You know, I fear that if they do make that law pass, then a lot of pest control companies won't use them anymore, and then we're going to see worse problems when rodent populations, especially in like DC and stuff, start going further up. The other thing, because of that situation not working or going the way that it is burrow treatments. This is called the Burrow RX machine. Basically, it takes a carbon monoxide drip, it pumps carbon monoxide into these voids. Now, there's a bunch of restrictions on this machine and a bunch of prep. You got to make sure that like you're not shooting carbon monoxide into a house, for example. You know, that can go bad. We kind of heard different stories about people getting poisoned from certain gases being pumped inside the house. So you have to go the length of making sure everything's covered and nothing's getting inside that house. I'm going to skim through cockroaches very, very quickly. I mean, 3 basic types of cockroaches that we have in our area: German cockroaches, American cockroaches, Oriental cockroaches. I don't know if you guys ever list these guys on your reports, but when you do have to list cockroaches on your report, if you were going to, I would say as a homeowner, probably the most important would be the German cockroach, because those guys are highly invasive. They live inside your home. They're not coming from outside in. They multiply like crazy. One egg sac can have up to 46 nymphs inside of it, and they can really take over your home, your bathrooms, and your kitchens, right? And they're extremely hard to get rid of too. They build up a lot of resistance to products and pesticides. Signs of infestation would be the insect itself, fecal matter. That's a picture of a cabinet door. They like the tight squeezed places. German cockroach infestation. You can see all the fecal matter inside that corner. It's a lot easier when the cabinets are white to spot that kind of stuff out, but it kind of sticks to the cabinets like glue. You got a heavier granular. This would probably be more associated to this would be more associated to like American cockroaches. Some people will say I have mice, and we go up inside their attic and we find this, and it's not mice, it's American cockroaches that just like their attic space. Sheds. They go through incomplete metamorphosis, which, like us, we go through incomplete metamorphosis. Basically, when we're born, we have a baby stage, a toddler stage, teenage stage, and adult stage. That's kind of how cockroaches are too. They, instead of going through egg, nymph, larva, adult, they go through this incomplete metamorphosis to gradually grow 'em. And when doing that, they molt a skin, which you can sometimes find those sheds laying around. It looks like just a flat cockroach, basically. And the worst problems is the smell. If you've ever been in a bad German cockroach home, you're gonna like that smells gross, pungent, musty, somewhat oily or greasy, something along those lines. You'll know that smell once you know that smell. Hazards, health risks for some. So like people that have underlying conditions, things like asthma or anything like that, you can definitely cockroach infestations can cause worse problems than that. Contamination, they like to go after our foods too. And then there's, it could be signs of other risks that they're dealing with, whether it's water leaks or, sewage backups or drains being clogged up, anything like that. If you get like the American Oriental cockroach infested at home, that's typically what will lead to those guys. Treatments involve liquid barrier treatments, granular or gel baits. There's a good picture of German cockroaches going after some gel bait on a bait tray. For German cockroaches, there's a clean out service, which involves flushing out these insects and then either hitting them with a general insecticide that's going to kill them more on contact, or vacuuming them up. So a lot of companies do that.
I see stuff sold where it's like this aerosol bomb. You put it in the middle of the room, pull the top.
Hot shot.
Obviously, no one can be in the house while that thing's going.
Right.
How effective are those?
Those are very ineffective. I do not recommend those ever, ever, ever for cockroaches. They'll be good for something like flies in an attic, or flies in an attic is probably the only thing I'd probably recommend for those. But those pest bombs, hot shot or whatever it may be, these are repellency flushers that are used. They're foggers basically. What's going to happen is they're going to set that guy off inside of a kitchen. It's going to drive those cockroaches deeper inside the walls. We're not going to be able to find them. You think you're successful because you don't have cockroaches for a month because it repelled them that well. But then a month later, you get a full-blown infestation, which if just had the professional come in and do, non-repellents and a clean out service, it wouldn't be that hard to treat. If you flush them inside that wall, it gets really difficult to try to treat those guys. Last resort, fumigation. And we have seen this happen when it gets really, really bad inside of a home. Dotson or some of these companies that do fumigations will go out and they will tent a house for them. And last resort, highly toxic and a lot of money. All right. Others, we got some snakes. I wanted to I had a whole thing planned out to talk about. Everybody thinks that whenever they run into a snake, it's a copperhead. They happen. They're definitely in the area, but they typically live in a lot more wooded areas. You don't typically find them just in the middle of a neighborhood, in an area like that. I've had Fairfax County cops call me and say, "Hey, we got a copperhead here," and I get out there and it's a gardener snake or a juvenile rat snake or something, or corn snakes. Very, very common. Corn snakes are very common where people would discount those, but most snakes are non-venomous and will not strike without being provoked. But beware, there are species in our area that can cause a lot of harm. Treatments involve reducing their food source. Rodents is the number one food source. Insects are a big food source for most snakes, and then there is some successful repellents out there for the eastern rat snake and all that guy. Next guys are the bats. Typically found inside of attics. Signs would involve their guano. They too have oily fur, so you'll find stains for them. And then you'll actually hear them sometimes. Sometimes you're just doing an attic inspection and you hear that. That's how they do this clicking sound to kind of see. That's their sonar basically, for them to kind of see what's going on. Sometimes you'll hear them crawling around inside the insulation. Like rodents, bats can carry pathogens in their droppings. A hazard of them is they have sharp teeth. Don't ask me how I know, but bats are bats can, can be very freaky. You catch a mouse, they're no big deal, got round teeth, but these guys got pretty sharp teeth. Oh yeah, the iguanas, definitely. Yeah, no, I mean, the same thing, that oily fur and everything, they can get gross. Treatments are eviction and exclusion typically, but there is a lot of Virginia restrictions on what can exactly be done with a bat. There are protected endangered species in Virginia, some of them. There's certain species that are, but always check to make sure that, like with a professional, if they can be excluded, if they can be trapped, or whatever the case may be. The state has a bunch of restrictions. That'd be interesting. I'd like to get a video of that. But very briefly, since we have a few people in the room, WI inspections, these are not bug reports. They are a wood destroying insect report only. Do not if you're doing a WDI inspection, do not list cockroaches and mice and stuff on this report. This is for wood destroying insects only. Termites, powder post beetles, carpenter ants, carpenter bees. The list can go on and on. Wood destroying insects. When you do these things, you have to fill out what's called the NPMA 33 form. This is information. Basically, there's they want to know what was found, if there was no visible activity inside of a home during an inspection. If there was, they want to know if it's live insects, dead insects, or damage, and then they want to know the location. My recommendation is, if you guys all probably know this as inspectors yourselves, make sure that you have a good flashlight and a good camera with you. Like, document as much as you can, and if you see it, report it. Right. So, I've had people say, "Oh, there's one carpenter bee hole on the back deck." No, you should definitely report, even if it's one carpenter bee on that back deck, because there's liability risk and all kinds of things like that. And then, the next session would be the recommendations to place inside. If you find anything, you're going to want to recommend treatment. Get with me and I can tell you if you have any questions on what recommendations would have for what would destroy an insect that there could be, or if you don't have any action, if you don't have no activity, then no actions. And then my personal favorite is the obstructions in inaccessible areas, because that's what's going to protect me as a business owner. Basically, when we do these WDI inspections, there's a lot of things we can't see, right? I lost my see-through vision at birth, just like the rest of you guys. And so beyond those walls, I can't see that. Well, this form at least makes it so that we can list that, like, hey, there's a fixed ceiling, or there's wall coverings, or a wood pile that was outside. I couldn't move the whole wood pile to see, if there was something going on there, etc. But make sure you're using those. Attach photos. If you have additional comments and stuff, make sure you write those things up and attach that in with this report. Like I said, termites are usually the number one thing that causes pest control companies to get sued. These inspections are a big part of that as well. Somebody having an issue when they didn't, or when they moved into a home after an inspection, saying there's no problems here, right? To protect yourself. 22% of homeowners use professional pest control services. 54% try do-it-yourself measures to exterminate pests. This leads to a lot of mistakes and harder infestations to control. That's if you take anything away from today, like, get the pros to get out there and take care of it. It gets really, really difficult when do-it-yourself measures happen. A lot of mistakes, sometimes even like horrible things, like people dying and stuff from misuse of products or stuff. And then there's a bunch of regulation that come back from these things being misused or done improperly. One of my favorite quotes: "Mr. Painkilling is my business," or "Major Painkilling is my business, and business is good." Thank you, guys.
Do you have time to share anything on stink bugs and/or fleas?
Do I have any time? I'm at
Sure, take 3 minutes.
Okay, 3 minutes. So stink bugs are a very difficult pest to deal with in itself, mainly because stink bugs don't go through they don't always go through self-grooming instances. So sometimes repellency's been proven to work against them. You can use a repellency around the home, and that will keep them out. But non-repellents, which are usually the thing that's actually going to kill the insect, those things are a lot harder. I always tell my clients that these are hit or miss pests. Typically, stink bugs have been around for a long time. So at one point, their population was so high that people didn't, we didn't know what the heck was going on with them, right? They were just invading homes. Now that there's more of a predator base around them, they're not as bad as they once were. You usually will get an uptick in population in the springtime and then in the fall time because they're overwintering pests as well. But they can be they're hard pests to handle with product, but they can definitely be taken care of, hit or miss. If one thing doesn't work, we try something else.
What about earwigs?
Earwigs are they're very common, very ugly and nasty bugs. But honestly, they're harmless. They don't cause any harm. They're really typically, a general insecticide knocks those guys out with no problem. Oh, and then fleas, you asked about fleas. There's tons of great product on the market for fleas, and now also most mosquito treatments, like those products that are used inside mosquito treatments that pest control companies are doing or a lot of people are doing, those actually covered fleas as well. So they're getting better. Like our products are getting better in our industry. Years ago they were a lot harder to control and stuff, but they're those kind of creepy crawlers are a lot easier to handle.